I was standing in the ballroom, the chandeliers throwing gold light across polished glasses and white linen, when Ronan leaned toward me with that sly grin of his. He raised his glass and whispered just loud enough for the table to hear, "Half of your $2.7 million house is mine." The whole table laughed, thinking it was some clever toast. I tightened my grip on the envelope in my jacket pocket, the one with the escrow notice. The paper felt like a stone against my ribs. It is strange how a moment can split your life. I was 70 years old, a retired boat builder who liked long walks by the river and the quiet of my workshop. I thought I had built a life that was mine alone. But there at my granddaughter's wedding, I was reminded how quickly family can turn into strangers. The noise of forks and glasses filled the air, yet inside me there was only stillness. I looked around at faces that once belonged to Sunday dinners and holiday laughter. Nobody met my eyes. Not my son by adoption, Ronan Vale, not his wife, Therese, not even the cousins who used to beg me for carved toys when they were small. They all kept talking, clinking glasses, pretending nothing had been said. I sipped water, the glass sweating in my hand. Outside the ballroom windows, I could see the parking lot where my car sat, its windshield, catching the late Sunday. Inside, everything was bright and warm, yet I felt like a man standing alone in winter. That is the trick of family betrayal. It does not arrive with thunder. It arrives in laughter and toasts, in a sentence slipped between sips of champagne. I remembered the rehearsal dinner the night before, the way Therese brushed past me and whispered, "Don't be stubborn, Lawson. The deed is only paper." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. Paper, yes, but paper that carried a lifetime of sweat. Years of sanding oak and bending cedar of mortgages paid $1 at a time. Now the orchestra started a light tune. The bride, my granddaughter, was smiling at her new husband. I wanted to smile for her, but the weight of Ronan's words pressed down harder than the collar on my neck. They thought I was invisible. They thought age made me soft, that love made me blind. But what they did not know was that the Ring camera on my garage door had been watching, and it had caught more than they could imagine. I leaned back, let the laughter wash over me, and felt the calm I always get before cutting wood. When you build boats, you learn patience. One wrong stroke and the whole hull cracks. One careful cut and the vessel lasts for decades. This family thought they had carved me out already. They thought they had my trust in their pocket. They thought I would stay silent, nodding along while they plotted over property worth millions. I touched the envelope again and whispered to myself, "Not today." You are listening to the beginning of a story that will tear open a wedding, freeze a bank account, and show what it means when a man refuses to be erased. Stay with me because this part matters. Tell me where you are watching from and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money. I live alone now in a modest townhouse tucked behind sycamore trees in Greenwich. Retirement suits me. I walk the river trail at dawn, carry a thermos of black coffee, and sometimes stop to teach the younger men at the community workshop how to plane a crooked plank. They call me the quiet one who fixes everything. I smile at that. Quiet is not weakness. Quiet is choosing your moment. Ronan Vale never understood that. I took him in when he was a thin teenager with restless eyes. His mother gone too soon, his father gone too often. I gave him my name, my roof, my tools. For years he worked beside me in the boat shed. But even then I could see the impatience. He wanted shortcuts, quick cash, shiny cars. The kind of man who thinks credit is the same as respect. Therese's wife was worse. Polished smile, soft hands that never held a hammer but always reaching. They lived in a condo they could barely afford, kept afloat by favors and promises. I kept my distance until the wedding planning began. That was when I saw how deep their claws had sunk. One evening an email reached me by mistake. The planner, Morel, forwarded a contract draft. In the fine print, Ronan had asked her to switch the wire receipt details, moving the catering deposit into an LLC under his name. It was only $17,800, but fraud is fraud. I printed the email, folded it, and slid it into my leather folder. Paper speaks when people lie. A week later, a friend from the old workshop pulled me aside, eyes wide. He showed me a screenshot from a family group chat, one where I was not included. There it was plain as daylight, Ronan and Therese joking about how soon I would get confused and how the conditional power of attorney would activate. They called me the old man with the $2.7 million prize. I thanked my friend, slipped the paper into the same folder, and kept my face still. Patience. Always patience. At the rehearsal dinner I tested them. I paid for my coffee with Ronan's spare card that he had borrowed from my jacket, tipping exactly $3. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a bank alert asking if I had approved the charge. Proof enough. That night, the Ring camera gave me the final piece. At 2 in the morning, Ronan and Therese crept into my garage, flashlight beams bouncing off the rafters. They rifled through the cabinet where I kept old deeds and contracts. The camera caught every movement, the way Therese stuffed a quitclaim deed into her bag, the way Ronan whispered, "Once this is filed, he's finished." They believed I was asleep. They believed technology was their ally, not mine. The next morning, I nodded through breakfast. Therese kissed my cheek with sugary lips. Ronan clapped my back too hard, calling me the legend. Around us, the family laughed, toasting to love and fresh beginnings. I chewed my bread, swallowed, and smiled. They had no idea what was waiting. Because while they plotted, I had already contacted attorney Greer Fallon. Greer and I had prepared a codicil to my will, notarized and sealed, ready to be revealed when the time was right. We also reviewed every line of my trust, confirmed the LLC structure that gave me 51% control of the waterfront apartment, and placed a conditional freeze on any escrow account tied to the wedding. All I had to do was wait for the right stage. And what better stage than a wedding ballroom full of witnesses, champagne, and cameras clicking? I kept walking the river that week, sipping my coffee, nodding at neighbors, quiet as ever. But inside I was sharpening the blade. Because revenge, like boat building, demands patience. And patience was about to run out. The days leading up to the wedding were a show of extravagance. Rehearsal dinner in a rented hall, roses imported from Holland, a string quartet tuning their bows while waiters carried trays of oysters. I watched it all with the same calm I used when sanding a keel, steady, deliberate, silent. Ronan was strutting through the room as if he had written the checks himself. He laughed too loud, shook too many hands, posed for photographs beside champagne towers. Therese trailed him, her sequin dress catching the light, whispering into her phone when she thought no one noticed. That night, the Homeowners Association sent me a fine. The notice slipped under my door like an insult. Porter Lund, the chair, wrote that Ronan had disturbed neighbors with loud music and cars parked across lawns. A small thing, but it showed me their pattern: treat everything as theirs, pay nothing. I folded the fine and slid it into the folder with the email, the group chat screenshot, the ring footage. Evidence piling like planks for a hull. The morning after, I tested them again. At the cafe on Main Street, I used Ronan's borrowed card. The tip was $3, just enough to trigger the fraud alert. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Suspicious transaction. Did you approve? I smiled into my coffee. Yes, I approved. But the bank did not know that the approval was my proof. That evening, I returned home, fed the cat, and checked the ring feed. There they were, Ronan and Therese, slipping into my garage at 2:13 a.m. The flashlight trembled across drawers until they found the file cabinet. I watched Therese lift the quitclaim deed, her hand shaking as she shoved it into her purse. I watched Ronan whisper, "Once this is filed, he is finished." A man learns a lot in 70 years. He learns that words fade, but video does not. I saved the file, duplicated it onto 2 drives, sealed one in the safe, carried the other in my coat pocket. When I saw Ronan the next morning, he slapped my back, called me. Old Captain asked if I had slept well. I looked him in the eye and said, "Like a log on still water." He grinned, thinking me slow. Therese kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp, her smile sharper. They thought they were sailing smooth. They did not see the storm ahead. Because I had already spoken with attorney Greer Fallon. We sat in her office, the codicil spread on the oak desk, her notary stamp waiting. We confirmed that my trust held the riverfront apartment through an LLC, with me holding 51% control. We reviewed the escrow account tied to the wedding hall and placed a conditional freeze, $17,800 locked, waiting for my word. I did not raise my voice. I did not warn them. Quiet power is sharper than a blade. At the rehearsal dinner, as the quartet played and Therese checked her phone again, I simply sipped my wine. I watched Ronan brag about the future, about managing family assets, about putting property to better use. He thought the quitclaim deed in Therese's purse was his ticket. He thought the family chatter and private messages was hidden. He thought I was blind, deaf, slow. But the county clerk's search was already scheduled, and what it uncovered would strip away the last of their cover. I folded my napkin, stood and left before dessert. People thought I was tired. They did not know I was ready. Because patience is not weakness. It is a man sharpening his tools, waiting for the right timber. And the wedding ballroom would be the timber. The wedding day opened with blue skies, as if heaven itself had chosen to bless the ceremony. Guests in silk and tailored suits drifted into the ballroom, their laughter echoing beneath crystal chandeliers. I wore a dark suit, plain, and pressed the same one I had worn at my wife's funeral many years ago. It reminded me to keep my heart steady, my hands calm. I shook hands, accepted embraces, listened to empty compliments. Ronan strutted in like a man who already owned the place. Therese glided at his side, a queen in borrowed jewels. Neither noticed the envelope in my pocket nor the folder tucked under my arm. The ceremony passed like a dream. My granddaughter glowed her new husband, trembling as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I clapped, smiled for photographs, even raised my glass for a toast. But inside, the tide was rising. When the dinner plates were cleared and the orchestra shifted to softer music, I rose from my chair. The ballroom quieted. I set the folder on the head table and spoke in a voice that carried without shouting. "I regret to interrupt," I said, "but there is business that cannot wait." Murmurs spread. Ronan chuckled, trying to lighten the air. "Sit down, old man, this is a party." I pulled the first paper free. "This," I said, holding it high, "is notice that the escrow account for this event has been frozen. $17,800 in catering fees are on hold until further review." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The planner Morel went pale. She reached for her phone, already checking the balance. Therese's smile collapsed. Ronan's face flushed red. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I already did." I motioned to the doors. Attorney Greer Fallon entered with a notary at her side. Their briefcases clicked open on the table. The sound was louder than the music had been. Greer unfolded the codicil to my will, pressed flat with her palm. The notary raised his stamp. Effective immediately, Greer read, "All conditional power of attorney granted to Ronan Vale is revoked. Authority returns solely to Lawson Pike." The stamp hit paper with a thud. The ballroom erupted. Some shouted, some whispered. My granddaughter looked stricken, torn between joy and dread. Ronan surged forward, but I held up a hand. "Stay where you are." My voice was calm, but the silence that followed made it heavy. I lifted the second document. "The smart lock system for my house is registered under my account. Effective this moment, your access cards and codes are void. You no longer have entry." I watched the shock hit them. Therese reached into her purse, fumbling with her phone, but the screen already showed access denied. Ronan's jaw clenched, his pride cracking like old wood. "This is madness," he spat. "We are family." "Family honors trust," I said. "You chose theft." Guests shifted in their seats, torn between loyalty and horror. The bride clutched her husband's arm, eyes darting between me and the man who raised her father. I placed the documents back in the folder, folded my hands on top of it, and let the silence hang. They thought this was the end, but it was only the first strike. Because the ring camera had more to say. The ballroom lights dimmed for the first dance. Couples circled the floor, dresses brushing against polished shoes. Laughter rose again, though, strained as though people hoped to smooth over the tension of my announcement. Ronan and Therese whispered furiously at their table, their faces tight. They thought the storm had passed. They were wrong. I signaled to the technician at the back of the hall. The screen that had been set for wedding photographs flickered to life. Music stuttered, and then there was silence. On the screen, grainy black and white footage appeared. A ring camera's angle my garage at 2:13 in the morning. Guests leaned forward, confused at first. Then they saw it, Ronan and Therese slipping inside, flashlights slicing through the dark. Gasps rose like waves. The footage showed Ronan rifling through drawers. Therese bent low, lifting a folder. Her hand trembled as she shoved the quitclaim deed into her purse. Ronan's voice, caught faintly by the microphone, carried across the ballroom. "Once this is filed, he's finished." The room erupted. The bride clapped a hand to her mouth. The groom muttered a curse. Relatives whispered, others stood to see more clearly. I remained seated, hands folded, watching them watch. Ronan shot to his feet. "This is fake," he shouted. "Edited." I lifted another sheet from my folder. A bank notice. At 2:13 that same morning, I said my account flagged an unauthorized attempt. "The alert shows your device, Ronan. It matches the time of the video." I passed the page to Attorney Fallon, who read it aloud. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Therese burst into tears. "It was his idea," she cried, pointing at her husband. Ronan slammed his fist on the table. "You old fool, you think you can humiliate me here?" I looked at him steadily. "I don't think. I know." Then I said the words I had prepared for years. "You wrote me off. I wrote you out." The guests stirred, some clapping, some stunned. The bride wept quietly, her dream day fractured by truth. I stood, straightened my jacket, and let the silence deepen. Family is not built on lies. It is built on trust. You chose lies. People shifted away from Ronan and Therese, their chairs scraping across the floor. Isolation is swifter than any gavel. They thought this was the end, the moment of defeat. But I had one more revelation waiting. Because the county clerk's search had uncovered a lien, a forged one tied to my property, and once it was revealed, there would be no shadow left to hide in. The ballroom emptied fast after the ring footage. Some guests made polite excuses, others left without a word. A wedding is built on celebration, not scandal, and scandal had filled every glass. Still I stayed, calm, silent, watching Ronan pace like a caged dog while Therese dabbed at her face with a tissue that smeared more than it dried. Attorney Greer Fallon stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the head table. The sound of the clasp snapping open cut through the murmurs. She drew out the county clerk's report. Pages of filings, seals, and signatures all lined in neat columns. Here, she said, tapping one page, is a lien recorded against Lawson Pike's waterfront house. It claims unpaid debt. She paused, letting her finger rest on the signature line. But the debt is fiction. The signature, a forgery. Filed under Ronan Vale's hand. Gasps again, sharper this time. This was not opinion. This was the county's record. Proof on paper. I stood beside her. That house was valued at $2.7 million last fall. And yet, someone thought it wise to chain it with false debt. I looked at Ronan. He looked at the floor. Greer continued, further, Mr. Pike's holdings are secured through an LLC. He maintains 51% controlling interest. That structure cannot be altered without his direct consent. Whispers rippled through the hall. Even those who had doubted earlier now shifted away from Ronan and Therese. The couple sat cornered, their ambition turned to ash. I lifted the codicil again, the ink still fresh, the notary stamp dark. This will stands, this trust holds, this LLC remains mine. No fraud, no forged deed, no power of attorney will change that. Ronan finally raised his head, eyes bloodshot. You think you've won. You've humiliated us. We'll fight. I shook my head slowly. You don't fight the truth. You drown in it. The notary packed up Greer, sealed the folder, and I laid the last sheet on the table, the escrow hold notice. $17,800 frozen, tied to this very celebration. The planner, Morel, stood stiff, clutching her phone, already calculating her losses. Therese's voice cracked. Why are you doing this here? At a wedding. I met her gaze. Because theft hides in shadows. Light belongs in public. Silence spread again. Only the orchestra's instruments abandoned on their stands gave a faint hum, as if the strings themselves disapproved. I looked over the crowd. You wanted a show. Now you have one. Remember it when you speak of family, of loyalty, of love. Then I gathered my papers, slid them into the leather folder, and buttoned my jacket. But what none of them knew, not yet, was that this spectacle would reach further than the ballroom. HOA fines, next-door post bank alerts gone viral. Their names would not escape the echo. Morning came gray and damp. I walked my usual route along the river, coffee warm in my hand, the town whispering behind me. Greenwich is a place that remembers scandal longer than weddings. By sunrise, the story had already bled into the neighborhood. The Homeowners Association Chair Porter Lund left a message on my machine. His voice carried that mix of scorn and glee only a bureaucrat can muster. Mr. Pike about last night. Multiple violations tied to the Vale household. Noise, parking damage to lawn. Fines will be issued. I replayed it twice, then tucked the cassette into the folder with everything else. One more nail. By noon, Morel the planner sent a curt email, contract terminated, deposit void, reputation endangered. She attached a screen grab of the balance, $17,800, still locked in escrow. Ronan had tried to reverse it, she wrote, but the hold remained. She ended with, I cannot be associated with fraud. Later that day, I walked past the market. Two women I hardly knew leaned together, whispering. Did you see the clip? One asked. On next door. The old man with the ring camera. I kept walking, but I smiled into my collar. By evening, local news ran a segment, Escrow freeze at Greenwich wedding. They replayed the footage, blurred some faces, but the story was clear: an adopted son accused of forging liens, a wedding halted by legal documents. The reporter ended with a phrase that made me chuckle. Quiet power is still power. Ronan and Therese did not call me. Instead, they called lawyers. But attorneys can only work with truth, and truth was not on their side. Their neighbors avoided them. Invitations dried up. Even family stepped back, muttering that they never knew Ronan could go that far. As for me, I attended no gatherings, answered no questions. I kept walking, kept sipping coffee, kept tending to small repairs in the workshop. Silence is the loudest statement when the world is already echoing with your name. One evening, I passed a group of young men on the trail. One called out, "You're the guy from the video, right? Respect." He raised a hand, and I lifted mine in return. Scandal had become story. Story had become lesson. But I knew this was not about attention, it was about closure, about ensuring that betrayal carried weight, that trust once broken left a scar no one could ignore. The wedding had ended in whispers and shame, but the reckoning had only begun. Because my revenge was never just about money, weeks passed. The air-cooled leaves turning the color of brass along the riverbank. Life settled into a rhythm, though the town still hummed with echoes of the wedding. Neighbors nodded at me in quiet respect. Some even stopped to shake my hand. But I remained the same man, coffee at dawn, walks by the water, the workshop where cedar shavings curled like ribbons at my feet. Ronan and Therese, though, could not escape the tide. The Homeowners Association issued fines for every offense, stacking until the sum looked like a mountain. Their names circled on next door, a public ledger of shame. The county began investigating the forged lien, the quitclaim deed, the power of attorney scam. What had been whispers at a wedding became filings in court. Morel, the planner, sued for breach of contract. The bank kept the escrow frozen. Their credit scores plummeted, each alert like a tolling bell. The grand house they had hoped to claim was locked beyond reach. I, meanwhile, made my move. Through the LLC, where I held 51% control, I secured my apartment by the bay. The trust stood firm. The codicil notarized and sealed closed every crack they had tried to slip through. My $2.7 million home became untouchable, beyond fraud, beyond whispers. Then I took one step further. I converted the old property, the one Ronan had coveted most, into a guest house for seniors abandoned by their families. The first resident arrived quietly, a man in his 80s left at a hospital with nowhere to go. He walked through the door, eyes wide, and I handed him a set of keys. That was the moment I knew revenge had ripened into something larger, not just defense, not just punishment, a legacy. Some nights I sit on the porch of that house listening to the river against the rocks. I think about patience, how it builds boats, how it builds justice. Ronan once said half of my home was his. Therese once whispered that paper was only paper. They were wrong. Paper speaks, paper holds, paper remembers. And when people ask if I regret making such a public stand, I give the same answer every time. I do not shout. I sign. You wrote me off. I wrote you out. Family is not blood. Family is choice, and I chose to keep mine clean. If you think Lawson made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way, share your idea.